everybody out there. Welcome back to the next conversation that we're having as part of Empowerthon, which is the inaugural fundraiser for the Parent Tween Foundation. And I'm actually very excited about this conversation because it's a topic that I know very, very little about. So stay tuned for just a second. First, I want to say to Nadine Rajeh, thank you so much for being with us, especially at 6:15 in the morning your time.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm thrilled to have you, Nadine. And for folks tuning in, we're going to be talking about life as a parent raising a child when you're an immigrant. And we've got some varying cultural influences. So stay tuned. But before we get there, here's a couple of housekeeping tips. If you're not familiar with Parent Tween Connection, first of all, we're where parents go when they don't know where to go to get help, either for themselves or for their kids, primarily kids between the ages of 10 and 20. We have a family community, we have a professional community, and our foundation is our nonprofit entity that helps to bridge the financial gap that so frequently exists between families and the resources that can help them. So because this is part of a fundraiser, there will be a shameless request to make a donation after our conversation with Nadine today. And all the information is in the description of the talk everywhere we're streaming to, which includes our private Facebook group, our YouTube channel, and our LinkedIn page. If you'd like to participate in the conversation, come on over to Parent Tween Connection in Facebook, join our group. I do have it open on the other monitor so I can pay attention to questions as they come up. And if you aren't able to join us, then comment wherever you're seeing it. We'll make sure that if you've got questions, Nadine gets back to you. So with that basic intro, good morning, Nadine, and thank you for being with me.
Hello.
So we're talking specifically today about how to raise your teen daughter when you're in an immigrant family. So being the daughter of a mother, we had our own complexities as it was. We were not in an immigrant family. So part of the reason I'm excited is that I'm like, okay, your focus is immigrants or in the immigrant community, but I'm imagining that a lot of what you talk about probably applies to families that aren't immigrants as well.
Yes. And when I say immigrant, I'm mostly talking about first generation or second generation immigrants, where the cultural gap is still very sharp. In the end, I guess we are all immigrants wherever we are.
True.
Yes. But the families that I'm speaking to right now are where that immigrant experience is still very fresh. The memory from the different culture is still very much alive and, playing its role within the family dynamics. Yes.
So I know this is something that you've experienced yourself. And so I'd love for you to give us a little bit of a background of what your experience has been like and how that establishes kind of like the platform for the support that you offer for families.
Yes. So I'm originally from Lebanon, and I started traveling when I was 21. I was a young mom at that time. My son was just a few months old, and we traveled a lot. And now I'm a mother of 4. So I raised my own kids out of my home country as an expat, as an immigrant, and before we finally settled in New Zealand at the moment. So I was very aware of how my own of how the whole immigrant experience was impacting my parenting. So maybe I should elaborate more on my story. So I was born right in the middle of the civil war in Lebanon, and but I was lucky to be born in a house where my parents valued education, and I was the eldest daughter. They raised me as if I was the eldest son. So they really invested in my own education, and they didn't put limits on on what I wanted to do. I studied engineering in college, and the reason was that not sure if people know, in Lebanon we have lots of electricity shortages, and I decided to study electrical engineering to build, power plants. I had this dream that I wanted to light the country up, and maybe the dream was a bit naive at the start, but it sort of drove me forward. And I studied engineering, so I was again the only girl in my class at the time. Like I think we were just 3 girls out of 40
Wow.
students graduating, and there was always this push inside me that I do wanted to pursue a career in engineering. Even if after I got married, and like I got married, by the way, during my last year in college, and my son was born like soon afterwards. And I didn't want being a mom to stand in the path of my career. And my husband was very supportive in that decision, so that was a bonus. And after we started traveling, again, it was all part of my engineering journey. When we came to New Zealand, I had the opportunities to volunteer in high schools and talk about STEM subjects. And I realized that a lot of teenagers have this fear or worry that they're not good enough to go for tough subjects like maths or engineering. So that's how my coaching really started, by just interacting with youth. And I'd also like to mention that I do have a creative side. I like creative writing, and I write fiction stories for teens.
Well, and I know that's where a lot of it started. You mentioned to me before our conversation that you're crafting the fiction for them, but then also mentoring them in, through your work, gave you a really good understanding of where they're coming from on so many of these issues.
Yes, and in my fictional writing, it gave me sort of a safe frontier where fiction is a safe space for kids to express and to just be honest about what they're going through. And you realize when you start having these honest conversations that a lot of issues are not talked about at home. And it sort of got me interested on okay, how can I help? And the idea of starting my coaching business, I call it the Teen Soul Coach, came up. And it was very much needed during the pandemic, when it was a very hard time for teens who had to just stay at home and could not find an outlet. And with this, of course, parents were also stressed out during that period. So imagine the friction that happens. Yeah.
So I know that one of the points that you made that you really is kind of like one of the foundations of your approach to coaching families is that you maintain that parenting is a two-way relationship. It's not just a cookie cutter set of rules that it's like, do this thing for every kid. And I think any parent listening who has more than one child recognizes that parenting can't be cookie cutter, because the same thing doesn't work the same way with two different individuals. But you said that it's more based on unconditional love, which I think people would think about, well, yeah, I'm supposed to love my kid unconditionally, but I like that you bring in mutual respect. So how is that like the foundation that so much of this is built on from your perspective?
I believe that parents and kids, that relationship, I think it's a very sacred relationship. And the way that we are, the way that I just tell parents is to treat it with that sort of respect. we are here to learn from our kids as much as they are here to learn from us. It's like they really, push our limits, and uh, it's really our own growth. Our parenting journey is for our own growth in terms
Mhm.
of our personal development, and our presence as our way of being.
Mhm.
So I invite parents to look at it from that perspective. Um, Imagine that you're in a work environment, and you're dealing with other colleagues. How would you treat them? You would also, uh, choose to choose, kind words,
Mhm. Or at least
not get,
respectful words.
yeah, yes, and not push yourself on them, not take them for granted, be present when they talk with you. So if parents could bring that into their relationship with their own kids,
Mhm.
um, that's what would sort of rekindle that connection between your kid and yourself, and
Right.
you're also being a role model for your kid. And yeah, I, I'd like to add one more thing uh, for teens, especially teens. They're at that stage in their life where, they have this sort of, inner fire going on. They're
Mhm.
energetic about life. It's their, um, uh, they're going through that development. Their sexual energy is coming online. They have
Mhm.
so much creative power in them.
Mhm.
And I always invite parents to think of it as a flame, as a tender flame inside them.
Mhm.
If we put so much rules if we suffocate them, that
Mhm.
will snuff their flame out. But at the same time, if we, let them burn out of control, they will hurt themselves and they will
Right.
hurt others.
Right.
So it's a balance.
I
Yeah.
like that image. So, how do you see the unconditional love and mutual respect coming up specifically when we've got that cultural gap that families are navigating? Because it's not easy when, as the adult, you want to maintain the ties to your land of origin, right? Or even a language of origin. I imagine it becomes even more complex when there are language barriers or language differences at the very least that are coming up. So how does this play into that role in specific?
Yeah. Um, Unconditional love means letting go of all expectations. It means you give your best, you do your best,
Hmm.
you give it all you've got, but you
Hmm.
detach from all outcomes. So it's
And man,
like,
if we could figure out how to do that, so many of us would be in a better place, right? What's so how does a parent even start to detach from that immigrant situation or not?
so the first thing is awareness, just self-awareness
Hmm.
of what you're holding on to as a parent. Um, uh, are you clear on your cultural values, or is it like an unconscious thing just running you? We For example, we do it this way because we've always done it this way. My
Hmm.
parents did it this way, and that's it. No arguing. Are
Hmm.
these your true values? Do you really support them, or are you just, going by that uh, default, by that default
Got it. Right.
values? That's the first thing.
Okay.
The second thing is uh, giving self-acceptance to ourselves as parents, and
Okay.
not thinking of our parenting as a measure of our own self-worth. Um, Sometimes that's parents are worried about what would other people think about me if I treat my kids, or if my kids do and this. So it's sort of, you have to know that you as a parent are uh, you're doing the best that you can for your kids' sake, not
Mm-hmm.
for your society's sake or for your parents' sake
Mm-hmm.
or for anything else. You
Mm-hmm.
have to come back to the, to your real why,
Mm-hmm.
and and let go of that need to prove anything.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
So self-awareness, especially of your own inherent biases or our inherent defaults, shall we call them, right? Where does
Yes.
compassion come in? You said, I think that's part of what you're talking about, of like giving yourself a little bit of grace, that you're doing the best that you can. Does that show up in any other way in this, do you think?
So compassion is not beating yourself up for mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
It's allowing yourself to feel whatever you're feeling, even if you feel guilty or ashamed. Just feel that feeling,
Mm-hmm.
and rise back up. Like it's about learning how to hold space for yourself, and
Right.
then getting back in the game by self forgiveness and acceptance. Okay, that it happened. I forgive myself, and now I'm gonna go down another path.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, knowing that it happened, it wasn't really a mistake. It was more of the universe telling you to be clear on something.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
yeah,
right. So that self awareness, the compassion. And then you also talk about active listening, that
yes.
that is a piece of the tool belt, or it's a tool in the tool belt that can help us increase our awareness of our own triggers as they show up with our kids.
Yes. So whenever I say active listening, I invite parents to think of their kids as mirrors. Um, they're like something telling you um, uh, what you're projecting on them. Um,
Mm-hmm.
okay, maybe that's a bit hard to understand, but sometimes the initial reaction of kids is actually they're projecting to you what you're going through.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a practical example: if you are angry and upset, you will find that your kids will be angry and will scream at you, for example.
Mm-hmm.
That's one part of it, and then the other part of it is when you sit down to actively listen. Again, you let go of expectations.
Mm-hmm.
You think, you actually listen to what they are trying to say without thinking about what you're going to say. You actually take in what they're saying, and again, let go of your expectations. Yes.
So much, um, so much of what I hear from professionals, and by the way, anyone tuning in, I'm actually not a parent. My husband and I have not chosen to go down that path, but between us, we do have just about 40 years of experience working with teenagers. And one of the things that I value the most about having conversations like this with professionals like you, Nadine, is that so many of the underpinnings of good connection and good relationships, yes, we talk about it in the context of teenagers, but so many of those commonalities, they are commonalities, right? So you're talking about mutual respect, the compassion, the listening, active listening. We've had similar conversations during Empowerthon, but you're bringing a different perspective to it. And I love that every time I have a conversation with another professional, I can be like, hey, we need to go, reference this other conversation. So to your point about listening, we had a conversation as part of Empowerthon with Deb Porter of a company called Hearing Out Life's Drama. And she was talking about how to listen so that your kids will actually talk to you. Now, maybe it's not a guarantee, but certainly if we can establish more parameters and more circumstances in which they do feel comfortable coming and talking to the adults in their lives, there's an infinite number of benefits out of that. How do you see that listening showing up when you end up having these massive cultural differences, right? Like, for example, you said yourself that you're with your own experience that your parents were very supportive of you getting an education, which was not the culture necessarily of the time in Lebanon, right? And in many places surrounding that, like that demographic of the world, or that geography rather, Many women don't have those opportunities legally, but even if they do legally, they don't have them societally. So,
Correct.
what do you
Yeah.
think it was for either for your parents in terms of listening to you if you wanted to pursue that path, or for another parent where their child or their daughter in this case is wanting to take steps that are in alignment with the culture in which they're growing in, but not necessarily in alignment with the culture that mom and dad come from?
Yes. So again, it comes back down to letting go of expectations and stop putting our own parents' self-worth on our kids. Stop projecting that on
Mhm,
our kids.
mhm,
Um, we are living. It, you will notice that in any generation, the generation of the kids will be different than the generations of the parents.
mhm,
It's always a time of change where um, things will be done differently, and we have to learn to trust that
mhm,
um, that inner drive which our kids have. It's like it's built into them, uh, so that they can actually move forward with the times.
mhm,
Um, I was born in a time, before the internet, before the mobile phone, and
mhm,
things have changed way dramatically.
mhm.
And we are also right now at times where things are changing with the coming of AI, with environmental measures. The jobs that will be there in a couple of times do not exist yet.
Right.
So, so
Yeah.
your yeah, so your kids are really are at the front of something really new,
Mhm,
and uh, we need to give them room to be creative, and
mhm.
creativity is creating something which has not been done before. Um,
Yeah.
and the only way to give them this space to be creative is to really let them experiment with the things that drive them on
Mhm,
the inside.
mhm,
uh, uh, in a lot of the cultural friction that occurs between parents and their daughters or boys, or or kids, is that the parents are just holding on to something old, something that has maybe worked in the past.
mhm,
So, and they are expecting it to happen again.
mhm.
So uh, they project it on their kids.
Right.
uh,
Well, and I
yeah.
think that applies again, like I don't have nearly the international experience that you do, but I see even if we take the ethnic culture out of the conversation, like that's not the only defining factor of culture, right? Like yes, ethnicity is a driving factor in it, but we have cultural change like you were saying with the environment. We have cultural change in terms of technology. We have cultural change in terms of religion and spirituality. We're experiencing cultural change, at least here in the States, about whether college really is the next best step for every kid. For a long time, we had the mentality, I think, largely that if you don't go to college, you're going to be a failure and you're going to end up living back in your mom and dad's basement afterwards. We have cultural change around gender and sexuality. And so it's intriguing that you say to me that, like, it's when there's that friction, whatever that cultural friction is. And I think a lot of folks just think it's ethnic cultural friction, but it's clearly not. To hear you say very pointedly that it's the parents holding on to, I think is the way that you put it, something that may have applied for them or may have been true during their coming of age experience, but is no longer necessarily, I don't necessarily like the word true, but true for their kids, whether it's true societally or not.
Yes, yes. And with immigrant families, there's why the friction is way greater, because there's also a sort of fear of experiencing the pain another time. Now, let's put it out there. The reason people immigrate is because they are not happy with the situation which is in their own country of background, and
Mhm.
there is always a pain that accompanies this
Mm.
sort of decision, and
Sure.
the fear of experiencing the pain, and whether themselves or their kids, they don't want their kids to experience that pain again.
Mhm.
So the fear is way greater. So that's why they hold on to these beliefs.
Sure.
Uh, it's because it's just it's so hard to let go and to trust and to
Sure.
just open up to all the changes.
Is there a grieving process of losing some of your identity when you leave your land of origin?
Yes, of course. And if you don't bring it into awareness and you
Mhm.
don't shine light on it, it will still haunt you.
Mhm.
Um, so that's why the first thing that parents should do is, self-awareness and get clear on their values.
Mhm.
I said it before. What do they want to carry with them, and what do they want to leave behind, and just start over, uh,
Right.
instead of carrying all the unconscious things with them.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, I asked that because while I haven't necessarily had the international experience, I've lived in three of the four corners of the US and now live on, inland from there as well, like different geographies entirely. I mean, I've moved farther than New Zealand is long, you know what I mean? So like, but at least for me, it's all within at least a quote unquote American culture, if there is one, because we are such a melting pot. But I know that there's definitely been a grief period for me each time I've moved geographically of like I'm going to lose that the identity of who I was when I lived there. And so I can see that coming up when there's a history of tradition and values that are within that culture itself. So a lot of this is getting us into this concept of EQ, IQ, and SQ, which I know you
Yes.
espouse are the three keystones that all need to be working together. Can we start by identifying those or defining them and then talking about how they need to work together and what parents can do to support that?
Yes, yes. So I'm sure everybody heard of EQ, emotional quotient, and that's your ability to manage your emotions.
Mhm.
IQ is your intelligence quotient. It more has to do with your executive functioning skills, your how you manage your thoughts.
Mhm.
And SQ is something that not everyone is talking about.
Mhm.
It's the spiritual quotient, and
Mm.
it it it's not related to religion. It doesn't have to be related to religion. It's mostly related to your sense of self-worth and self-value and connection to life.
Mhm.
um, and I think a lot of our mainstream society has lost a little bit of that SQ and we have focused a few years ago, maybe we were focusing so much on the IQ, on getting academics all in place, and
Mhm.
even as a person in an engineering background with
Mhm.
STEM background, there's a lot of focus on that, mental capabilities.
Mhm.
And of course, these days we're seeing the importance of EQ,
Mhm.
emotional quotient, and how we manage our emotions, and that helps us with, just in feeling, positive and managing our relationships with other people.
Mhm.
But I believe that the SQ is also a very important
Mhm.
thing,
Mhm.
because it just gives us this sense of, as I said, self-worth,
Mhm.
connection to life, and respect for life, appreciation for this energy,
Mhm.
this aliveness that we have in us. It drives us.
Right.
It also helps us with the self-compassion thing.
Mhm.
It brings us more close to our experience as as a human.
As a
And
human.
yeah, and we need all three of them working together. if you have if you have an imbalance between any of the three, you will
Mm-hmm.
see that something is missing in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's I invite parents to really focus on the balance of all three when they're
Mm-hmm.
raising up their teens.
The kids, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, and that spiritual quotient that you said, like that connection to others, that or that connection to something greater than self, right?
Hmm.
In some fashion, that actually came up in a conversation we had last night with Nadine Rajeh Sigmund, where she was talking about living a joyful life, having a joyful family. She's the one I mentioned to you before we went live, who actually lost her son to cancer. And she says, she talks so much about making someone else's day, doing something that puts a smile on someone else's face or makes someone else feel good. It seems to me like that falls into what you're defining as spiritual quotient.
Yes, it's making someone else happy by also you being you being kind, and
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily putting on false happiness,
Sure.
but holding space for whatever you're feeling, and just being kind and gracious to those around you, and
Mm-hmm.
seeing the bigger picture that, okay, we are more than our emotions, we are more than this experience,
Mm-hmm.
and this is all part of life, and there is something greater that's happening.
Awesome.
um, yes.
And I know that you and I could keep talking about this all day because the ideas are just like pinging in my head as we chat, but not everybody has all day to sit and listen to us talk all day. So, as a quick reframe, we've talked about really focusing on that mutual respect and unconditional love. We talked about recognizing your own triggers and practicing that self awareness. Um, and the compassion and the active listening to yourself and to the others. And then you said working to develop the EQ, the IQ, and the SQ. And there's so many ways that families can go about that. We've had some amazing conversations with other professionals as part of Empowerthon as well that can feed into these. And I know one of the things that we were talking about, Nadine, before we started our conversation is that throughout an event like Empowerthon, I have the privilege of learning from so many professionals whose underpinnings are so consistent. And so I love that we're presenting consistent thoughts for families to consider, but every single professional has put a different bow on it, or they've wrapped it up a little bit differently, or they've woven the pieces together in a little bit different design. But then at the bottom, we're talking about, or the foundation, so many of these concepts are consistent: being present, be there for your kids, learning how to be a better listener, letting go of the expectations. I heard you say that several times. And so I thank you so much for what you've shared with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me here, and thanks for everyone who's listening to this. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I told you there was going to be a shameless plug for a donation. If you've gotten value out of this, the best way that you can say thank you to Nadine is by following the link in the description to her donation link and making a donation. Even something as small as $5 or $10 US goes a tremendous way. Again, we're looking to bridge the gap between families and help the professionals can provide, whether it's parenting coaching, teen coaching, academic support, college admissions support, you name it. We want to help families gain access to the resources that are just not options for them at this point. So, Nadine, thank you so very much. And anybody else listening, thank you in advance for your donations.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, over and out. We'll see you next time.